Out there. Hi, welcome everybody to another live stream here from AutoCrit. I have Gareth here floating out in space. Hello, Gareth.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, today we are going to talk about mystery, the mystery genre, how to craft a compelling, what we're going to call an information plot a little bit later on. And the fun thing about mystery stories is that a lot of stories can incorporate mystery, right? You may not be full on mystery. Let me fix my collar here really quick. In the complete sense, or in the traditional genre sense, right? But you might have mystery components to your story. You might have a subplot or something to that effect. So it's good to dive into this no matter what genre you write. And we have some tips that I'd like to share when it comes to writing mystery. All right, so the first tip is choosing a tone. The thing about mystery is that there are multiple tones that you can take. In the kind of the most obvious sense, you have the genre of cozy mystery, which the tone of the puzzle of the mystery is very different than some hard-hitting thriller type mystery, right? There's a sense of fun and playfulness even when you're dealing with something like a murder. You can think like the classic Murder She Wrote television show, or a lot of those a lot of those afternoon or syndicated television shows, right? Where it's still hard hitting in a sense, and that you're talking about murder and you're talking about betrayal and things like that, but it's not really getting at the root of like human depravity and things like that. Now there are plenty of works that ride the line one, in the middle, or not take one extreme or the other. And so you have to kind of figure out, where do you want to sit? And the reason why is because if somebody picks up your book and it's like, it's a charming New England village and there's some person working at a bakery and somebody turns out murdered, it's like the next step you would think is going to happen, if you've established kind of a happy-go-lucky tone, is not that the murder was this ridiculously over-the-top brutalistic type of crime, and you generally don't have the same sort of threatening sense about the whole thing. It's more of, how could such a thing happen in a place like this, right? And then they'll solve it, and then order will be restored, versus other stories which can have a kind of the world is out to get you feeling. It's like a more of a film noir sort of vibe, right? Where there's danger lurking around every corner, and this is, they got this person, but what about the next person? So it's very important that you establish this, because you don't want to upset the audience, right? Because you could include all kinds of content that the audience just didn't sign up for. And you could say, well, it's a mystery, it's a murder mystery. They signed up for murder. It's like, yes, but did they really sign up for that sort of story, right? It's not like you need a content warning, this contains violence, but essentially it does become a bit like a content warning when you pick a certain tone, right? That this is going to, like I said, go into like human depravity versus, oh, isn't this kind of an interesting puzzle to think of, to do? It's the difference between playing the board game of Clue and watching a movie like Seven. They're just very, very different sort of stories. Have any thoughts on tone, Gareth?
No, I think that's very true. I was just chuckling at the seven thing there. With mysteries as well, I'm a fan of mysteries. Admittedly, I don't read a whole ton of mystery novels. But one thing, I love picking apart a good murder mystery. And tonally, I would say as well, that me being the kind of horror guy, I'm a huge fan of the Italian giallo genre, which are essentially, starting way back with filmmakers like Mario Bava, are essentially murder mysteries with a really nasty tone, and very violent, very graphic. But the basic makeup is almost like an Agatha Christie. It's a whodunit, but when people are they're often in very nasty ways, and that just kind of sets that apart from people who are into that kind of thing are not necessarily going to be the same people who are into something like Knives Out. They just want a good old mystery. They don't want the rest of the nasty stuff. I would say it's a great tip to mind your tone, especially in the early days as you start to. And I think even as you get more experienced with storytelling, really switching the tone up at a point is always a risk. It never changes. There's is always this thing of like, well, when you're really experienced, you can start to bend or break the rules. I think with tonal shifts, you're always gambling.
Yeah.
There was a really good movie that came out a few years ago called Summer of '84, which is kind of a mystery thriller, Rear Window esque sort of thing with some teenagers watching a neighbor and thinking he's a murderer, and it's all fairly light touch, 80s nostalgia kind of coming of age stuff, right up until the end when it crosses the line and does something severely shocking and then ends on a really, really bleak note. And you're not expecting that. That's kind of how the film played with its climax, but that is a gamble. Many people are going to get to that point and just hate the turn that it took. Of course, I love everything nasty and dark, so I was like, "Whoa, I did not expect that, and I love it. Thank you very much." But I equally know a number of other people who were like, "No, that was just too much. It didn't fit with the
Yeah.
rest of the story." So
No, it's
yeah,
very true. And it certainly comes into play when you think of what the detective has to do, the protagonist, whoever's solving the crime, what do they have to do? A lot of times, the tone, when it's a harsher tone, tends to get more into moral ambiguity too. So you'll have the detective potentially cut corners, maybe be a little bit deceptive, maybe even be a little bit threatening to get what they want. Whereas other people would balk at that, right? It's like, well, that's not what I signed up for. I signed up for kind of a good versus evil story. I want the criminal to, have their day in court, and the person who's chasing who's trying to put the whole thing together to be a, upstanding citizen. You know what I mean?
follow the rules.
Right, exactly, right? It's very different. Okay. Information plots. Yes, I threw out this term earlier. I'm not sure where it exactly originated from. I know Orson Scott Card talked about it, but the information plot. The idea is just, instead of just calling it a mystery, is to call it an information plot, and that's because what essentially the plot is surrounded on is a lack of information and the pursuit of information, right? And this can take all kinds of forms. So when it comes to a mystery, obviously you're trying to figure out, okay, who did it? But there's pieces of information they have to put together in order to actually figure it out. Yeah, in the mice quotient, I believe. Yes. Now, what was I saying about information plot? But the point is that if you are focused around thinking about it as an information problem, it can kind of help you in terms of planning it out, right? Because the idea is that it's just like we often say, the order of information affects how it's received, right? And that's how you can hide pieces of information, or you can obfuscate pieces of information. And of course, pieces of information given under the wrong context can make a big difference. There's the old classic way of hiding information, exposition through a joke. It's really effective, right? Because people will look at the information given to them in the story and they'll be like, "Ah, ha, ha, isn't that funny?" A character might say, we were snowed in all weekend, but the beer kept flowing or something, and it's a cute little haha moment. And then actually, no, it turns out that that's really important because that tells you something about the timeline, and they're going to change their tune later or something like that, right? Those sort of things are great to throw into a mystery, and orienting the mystery as an information problem can be very beneficial to you. Of course, this also means that most of the things that we talk about that are good for mystery are really good for anything that's a information problem. Any sort of mysterious circumstance, or where people are trying to figure out the answer to something. Even something that could be an existential question about themselves often can take the form a little bit of the information plot. So this is an interesting way of framing it. I just wanted to throw it out there. All right. That being said, mysteries do tend to be fairly plot driven, right? Uh, it is not the genre that generally works well, where the characters are super compelling and the plot is just okay. There are other genres where that can be the case, and while I never recommend making just an okay plot, there are some situations where you can get away with that. I would say high concept genres like fantasy, horror, sci-fi, you can end up where the setup is really interesting and the characters and the dynamic, and then what actually transpires can be fairly expected, and it's fine. It may not be the best work ever in it, but I mean, you can certainly point to things like Avatar, which is essentially that, and things such as that. I would say mystery, the danger is there is a strict plot often in these like whodunits and things like that, in terms of the clues getting revealed and the misdirection, but all of the specifics really matter in a mystery in a way that they don't so much in like a typical hero's journey fantasy, right? There, you're much more concerned about, is the character having that growth experience? Or something like horror, it's like, is it actually getting under your skin and talking about psychological issues? Whereas mystery, it's, is the puzzle itself that compelling, is a huge component of it. And so what you will find is that mystery writers do tend to be more plan oriented than a lot of other writers, because if you aren't, then it seems almost impossible to write a mystery without knowing the ending, because what do? You get to the end and they're like, who did it? And you're like, I don't know, like at some point you have to figure that out, right? And I suppose you can go back and foreshadow, but for most of the time that I talk to mystery authors, there isn't as much pantsing allowed. And so it is a different sort of genre to work with. And it's something to keep in mind. However, the danger in that is, because it is so plot driven, is that you can end up with some flat lines. So the first flat line I'm going to talk about is the story. It's very easy to flatline a mystery. And that's because the inciting incident is usually the discovery of a dead body, the opportunity to involve themselves in solving the case. And then the answer is the big finale. So what do you do in between then? It is pretty tricky. Somebody is saying that Agatha Christie wrote that way. We'll see. There you go. But I imagine there was a whole lot of rewriting, though. That's but the thing with the setup is that, once okay, this mystery has to be solved, then the danger is you could just tread water, and it could be like, okay, well, when are they going to get to the answer? When are they going to and there's this piece of information, but you're just kind of biding your time. At least that's how it can feel. There's a danger in that. And so you'll notice there's a lot of tricks that authors will use in order to raise the stakes in the midpoint for a murder mystery, or for any mystery for that matter. But this is something that's easily neglected when somebody just sets out to do it, especially for the first time, because they just don't think about it. They're like, oh, okay, well, I set it up. It's a clear mystery. And now I just have to put in my clues, and they have to like make some effort, and then they're going to solve it. That's fair, all well and good, but that's not generally going to be as compelling as if there's some sort of major shift that changes the landscape sometime in the story. You really run the risk of that second act sag. Do you have any thoughts, Gareth?
Oh, I was just coming into my mind there as well. I think it's the ideal place to deploy, red herrings, things like that. These avenues that you go down, or that the investigator goes down, and we follow them along. Like, yes, this is the right path. Turns out it's a dead end. Like this, but it's compelling in its own right. It's technically a subplot or something that can develop there. And I was thinking, between the combination of that and what you said about the kind of an information-based story, I think it's very true for these. Just as I kind of sit here and think about it, with all of the planning that comes into place. I really liked Angela's comment there. Said, I sometimes ask, what would the reader want to know next? And how do I slowly feed them information so they discover clues and then build up to the BAM? I think there's something very smart in there, which is, if you kind of look back, when your draft is done, you're going back and you're doing the rewrites and the editing of everything, is thinking in that informational kind of way as you go through. I think reading every section of the book and thinking, well, okay, if I divorce myself from this story and act like I'm just a reader coming in for the first time, does this paragraph or what's happening in this section of a scene make me think about a specific piece of information that I have not segued into here? And if it does make me think of that, if it hints at it, do I either need to remove that so that I keep some mystery in the story, or do I need to acknowledge that and redirect, so I can send you off in the wrong kind of area based on what you were thinking about, which, seems very smart to me.
Yeah. This is an interesting point. You need a dead person that plenty of people wanted dead. Yeah, in a sense, if you want to have multiple suspects. That's true. That's generally the way of going about things. It's not the only way, but yep. And this gets to somebody mentioned pacing. Angela said pacing. Yes. Yes, creating a sense of urgency is important, right? In theory, you can have a murder mystery and murders can in the real world can go unsolved for a very long period of time sometimes. uh Generally speaking, in fiction this isn't so much the case because that's not super compelling. But if you are going to deal with a situation where you're going to be maybe a little bit more realistic in terms of the time frame at which it can take place, often there's still a sense of urgency, and usually this comes through because of maybe a sense of urgent justice that needs to be made. Perhaps they're concerned the person's going to get away with it and do more crimes, for example. But what you can run the risk of is like, well, sure, it's all well and good, that you solve this crime, but it's like, excuse me, what's it to us if you take a little bit, right? It's not like anybody's life is in danger. And so, of course, the easy answer is, well, the killer is out there and they're going to kill somebody else again. That's not the only way to do it, though. Keep in mind, there are multiple ways to create that sense of urgency, but it is something you should keep in mind because you don't want the audience thinking, I hope they solve this mystery sometime. Like, no, you want it to be like, no, they need to solve it now, and there needs to be some reason. Sometimes it's, they only have so much time before maybe the agency won't let them investigate it anymore. Maybe there's a certain amount of clues that will go away. Like, you have everybody in the one space right now, and then they're all going to leave and they'll get away with it. There's different ways of doing that. Excuse me, I'm still a little congested, but a little much better than last week. All right, so the other flat thing you can worry about besides kind of a flat pace and a flat plot are flat characters. Not that this isn't a problem in other genres, but it's very easy in murder in mysteries, especially like the classic murder mystery, to make characters into cardboard cutouts because they are so functional in the story, right? You have the investigator who must solve the crime. You have the villain or whatever, the criminal who committed the crime, and then you generally have a bunch of other characters that might have committed the crime. And it's very easy to just kind of think of it in that rudimentary way and pull out the stock, clue type characters. It's the maid, the butler, the whatever. And there's nothing really wrong with this in a sense from a mechanical standpoint, right? But what you also want to do is go deeper if you can, and this will depend on the tone, of course, in hard, sort of gritty crime stories, often what this will get into is the complicated morality of navigating the world, because you'll have people that maybe they could have done it and maybe they do horrible things, but they're not capable of murder, right? Even though they seem suspicious enough. If it's more of a cozy, then often it can deal with their relationships with each other, the friendships, bonds. There's just more going on in their life than just the murder itself, right? And that's really the best way to prevent a flat character, is that if all they're doing in the story is just that mechanical purpose, well, ask the character. It's like, well, what else in your life is important to you besides this one situation, right? And then you can start to get them to talk about other things in their life, and you can start to explore other avenues of their life, for sure. A fabulous mystery plot can be destroyed by flat characters. I think that's true. I do think it's tough. Now, the danger with that is, I will say, there are some very intricate murder mystery plots where it's not like the characters are people you really warm up to or learn that much about exactly. But they'll still be compelling, right? So it is a little bit different than some other genres in terms of what you can get away with. And again, it gets to the level of how good that puzzle is, right? If the puzzle's super, super good, you're going to be able to get away with a little bit more. However, why would you want to do that, right? It's better to do both extremely well, because then you're going to glow in the dark and your work will be, quite noticeable, because it's really hard to do both of them extremely well. Any thought on flat characters, Gareth?
I love that term. Glow in the dark. I'm going to use that from now on.
It's true though, like, because I mean, you know how it is, because like we go through the contests and stuff, and there's sometimes when you're like going through, and all of a sudden you get to one, it's like, oh, because it's like, wow, this is really good, like. Just
But
how
no,
it is.
the characters thing, I 100% agree on as well. And just like you were saying, there's a number of, and to my mind and just to my taste as well, a lot of classical mystery novels that I've sat down and tried to read, or either didn't finish or just read, did finish but forgot about quickly, was mainly because all of the characters just felt bland to me. They are all, but they are still different and compelling. Just didn't stand out enough for me. But certainly, I think every character, and especially in a mystery, is make them all as I always say add as much sparkle as possible to them. They all have their own quirks. They all stand out against each other in some special way. But like you said, be mindful of the tone of your story, and because the tone will dictate kind of what these quirks are and how you put them in. A really dark and gritty one, yes, the people that are inhabiting that story are probably all going to be broken and traumatized in some different way that is setting them against one another. Whereas you get to the cozy level, and maybe what sparkles about these two characters is that one of them never forget the other for eating her sandwich at lunch that one time. It's something that feels lighter in the overall
Yeah,
scope of things, but
yeah.
is no less a source of animosity within the confines of that story. And I think as well, if you can get away with it, you can think about one way to really make a character stand out is to treat them like they have stepped out of the wrong story. Like you just have this one character who feels like they're inhabiting a tonally different place. You won't get away with it by spreading it into too many people in the story because that starts to mess with the tone of the story itself. But if your story is kind of serious, real, there are stakes here, and we really need to find out who this killer is. There's one person in there who feels like they've stepped out of a cozy, or who seems to be straight out of a comedy, like just completely kind of uncoordinated, useless person who's a bit of a source of physical comedy, perhaps. It's a nice way, but you really want to keep that restricted to one character from my perspective.
It's true. All right, I like it. So let's talk about planning the puzzle. This is obviously something you spend a whole lot of time on, and actually, I will be at the end of this month. We do have a mystery course opening up, and we'll get into a lot of this, but just some high level ideas. I mean, one simple thing, again, we're talking about an information plot, right? So, what you often want to do when you are planning a mystery is simply look at the information that's available, right? So, often I would say people come up with a hook, maybe an interesting setting or way somebody might get murdered or something like that, right? And then they have to start kind of thinking backwards about, okay, who are the types of people that would want to murder this person, et cetera, et cetera. So the nice thing about brainstorming a mystery plot is you get to use a lot of it. And the reason why is because most of your bad ideas can simply become red herrings later. So don't throw away anything. Like if you have somebody who whatever died in a museum and it's like, well, they could have died this way, they could have died this way, they could have died this way. All those things can be postulations that the detective comes up. You can even have misdirected, you can even change the information in order to fit that a little bit better so that it can appear that way. It's a lot of fun. The challenge, of course, is that you want to make sure you land on the answer to the mystery that is going to be the most satisfactory one to the audience, right? And that could be tricky to determine when you haven't actually written it out yet. So I know some people are saying, there are authors that don't actually figure out advance, and I think that's how a lot of them would work. Is they're kind of like, well, they'd have a lot of different ideas on the way it could happen, and then they just kind of plan it out, and then they kind of write it, and then they get to the end, and they're like, okay, that's the one I like the most, and then they rewrite it and make sure that's the only one that can fit. Because of course the other danger is multiple explanations being just as valid. This is a danger. There's a problem when you have the detective and they're able to put it together that ultimately this is the way it transpired, and the audience is like, I don't quite understand how they were able to eliminate this option and this option and this option. And sure, they could take a guess and then the person might confess or something. And sometimes actually mysteries will actually, they call it hang a lantern on it when they point out something that the audience can figure out for themselves. That's a bit of a mulligan you have to give the book. They'll have the detective eliminate down to a few, and then they'll do they'll plan some sort of trick or trap to get that last person, right? That's fine, but it's just at some point you have to have something that would eliminate the other people, right? And short of a full-on confession, which that's a bit of a trope. It's fair enough. It's a trope that you can use because it's used a lot, right? But if you want to avoid that, you want to make sure that you have adequately eliminated the other options, right? But like I said, don't throw away any ideas because they're always helpful. Even if it's not in this book, it's in another book. People who write mysteries will end up coming up with 80 billion different ways of murdering people and motivations and all kinds of stuff. Your Google search is pretty amazing. Yeah, like what kind of evidence too, right? Because again, they're often looking for something that maybe the audience hasn't seen a bunch of times. So it's who knows what, right? There's some sort of telltale clue that's a distinctive feature of somebody. And this is hard to do and keep it obfuscated. But when you do it well, audiences love it. Particularly if it's something really distinctive and you're like, oh, I should have put that together and I didn't. That's great. That's really great. But like I said, I could spend a lot of time on this, and I will. Do you have any thoughts, Gareth, on puzzle planning?
No, I think that's great. The again, just the notion of not forgetting anything that you came up with, even if it doesn't work. It's the fact that it doesn't work makes it actually pretty good for a fake out.
Yeah,
Because you have to get to the point where the information drops into place and we realize why it doesn't work. And I
yeah,
think, a thing with a good mystery is like everybody involved there has a potential reason to have wanted to kill the whoever was the victim, so they can all be suspects, literal suspects. And you might spend the whole time as you're writing the thing thinking that, okay, well, this person is the killer because of this and they got the opportunity here and therefore went in and did that. You could take something like that and fake out with you know all of those clues, point the detective, point the audience towards that person. They are about to reveal that person as the killer, or they get them cornered, and the person is like, well, yeah, I tried to do it but I failed. It's like all of the stuff you said is correct. You have got me exactly pegged on what I tried to do. I wanted to kill them, but I bungled it.
right.
And now we're off in a different direction. It's like, okay, so it's not you, and that part can be
Yep.
proven. Things like that can
Yeah.
come into your mind. It's like, this isn't working the way I'm trying to plan this. Okay, let it not work. Just slot it differently into the story.
Yep. And that's where you can get into some of the clever notions. It's like there's multiple killers, the multiple attempts by multiple people, and how complicated you make it is really up to you. I mean, there's always a risk when you do some of the super clever type that people will be rather annoyed. I know a lot of people were annoyed with the big twist in Glass Onion. I kind of sort of called it I halfway called it. But you either went with it or you didn't. Although I will say that was in many ways more of a character piece than a plot piece in a lot of ways. All right. Research, research, research. Yes. Mystery is a genre where people will really be annoyed if you ask them too much that violates basic laws of physics, basic ideas of how weapons work. This is not one of those where you can just kind of get a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, because remember, at the center of it is, in fact, that puzzle, right? So while we might totally not care in a horror, if the person can develop some sort of superhuman strength in one pivotal moment in order to get past something. I mean, granted, people get irritated with that too. Or, in a fantasy where it's like, okay, that's not really how a sword would work, but it's whatever. You really can't get away with this in murder mysteries. Like, I mean, granted, I'm sure everybody can point to examples of successful mysteries that do violate these things, but it is a very risky thing to do because often people will feel it's a cheat because you told them the information and then you said, well, despite the fact that actually it doesn't work this way, somehow it does. Isn't that interesting? Right. So it really can frustrate people. So simple things, it's like just how guns work, how arrows work, how knives work. Like these things should be researched. If you do not know, if you're like, well, they wouldn't hear a gunshot from that far away, it's like, oh really? You might want to make sure, because if the audience can pick it out and they're like, yeah, no, they totally could, and I would never have imagined that that's what they did because that doesn't make any sense, then it's not a real puzzle. It's just an exercise of the author, and the audience wasn't allowed to play around. All right. I think that's pretty self-explanatory.
It's the old suppressors don't work like they do in the movies.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things like that too, and the challenge is that movies. First of all, movies generally are not in the mystery genre so much. It's not a super popular genre for mysteries, for movies. Often you have like action thrillers and stuff like that, and really like action thrillers, nobody cares about the fact that you can't shoot that many bullets from a gun without
Yeah,
reloading and
you
so on,
just buy it.
because that's not the point. The point is the excitement and the chase and all of that. But when the point is the actual puzzle, no, you can't do that. All right. I do think that this is kind of my own little tip. I don't think it's always important, but I do think it's one thing that I've noticed in mysteries that have resonated with me is when the solution matters beyond just the solving of the thing. What I mean by this is that the book often is thematically getting at something bigger, or there are implications in the plot that make the conviction of the criminal something that has more resonance than just, oh, isn't it nice they're off the streets, right? I mean, obviously that does matter, but justice was served in some major way, and there's some sort of relief for the victims, or all kinds of other things, right? Like what we really learned about the world because the solution uncovered some sort of deep conspiracy, or it uncovered interpersonal relationships, and we got to explore something. I feel like those are the stories that tend to stand the test of time a little bit more. And I'm not mocking people that just kind of want the fun little puzzle, and it's like whatever, encyclopedia brown sort of style, where it's like, oh, we did it, isn't that nice, and whatever. Fair enough. I mean, Murder She Wrote was popular, but I do think when you can go deeper than that, it's a great opportunity to do so.
Yeah, it's almost
Any
like
thoughts?
the Scooby Doo ending.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Would have gotten in the way and not the belly kids. Yes, ultimately, not yes. There's something to that. I will say that the type of stories that tend to do this do tend to be more that episodic type. And the reason why the solution doesn't matter that much is because if it did, well, it would have implications for the next
Yeah,
story, and the author is not trying to make that sort of linear story. However, even then, you can make episodic stories where in that microcosm of the world in that story the solution did really matter and made a very big impact, that that person got involved. I Getting back to, we mentioned Knives Out, but both of those I would say the solution really does matter a lot. And I know there's going to be more films, and there's not much of a connection between the two movies. I would say it really doesn't matter if you watch one movie before the other or anything, because it's just the detective character repeating, and he doesn't seem to be having some sort of major arc in of himself. However, I will say the solution did matter to both of those stories. All right. Another thing that you can try doing is subverting expectations. This is challenging to do in mystery because that's kind of the expectation. So it's like, how do you do that? How do you subvert the expectation that you're going to subvert expectations? But regardless, even though it's expected that you're going to do something unexpected, you still need to do something unexpected. So it's a bit of a, whatever you want to say. It's like a bit of an oxymoron, but it is challenging to do because the audience is literally looking for that, right? But when you do it well, that's when audiences are really happy. When it's like, oh, I never thought that they would, whatever, that the hat would mean this, or that the soda would mean this, or this was a clue, or that audiences eat that sort of stuff up. So it's something to keep in mind as an audience. The audience expectation is that you will defy their expectation. It's similar to science fiction. Science fiction is can often be, and there's one reason why a lot of science fiction is information plot too, and that's because science fiction is a lot about enlightenment and trying to change the way you look at the world and discovery and things like that. And so, yes, mystery is similar, not nearly on the level of science fiction, because again, we're not expecting the laws of physics to be broken. We're not expecting to end up, completely blowing our mind. But it's kind of a smaller version of that sort of feeling, for sure. This is a good point too. If you're doing, depending on the era, you do need to be very careful about this. I have seen times when people are very anachronistic in terms of how crimes were solved in other eras. They act like it's Law and Order, you know, back in the 1700s, and no, that is not in fact how any of that worked back then. And you need to keep that in mind. And there is something interesting about that too, in terms of the limitations of technology and what that allows you to do in terms of information restriction as well. I mean, nowadays, getting back to information plot, you know, you can look up just about anything. So research is a lot easier. So I think that is one reason why you do see people that either put the character in a low technology sort of setting, maybe their cell phones don't work or something like that, or they don't have records in that town. It's kind of podunk, and so nobody really, you know, we don't use the internet around these parts, kind of thing. Yes, that's one of the reasons why is because you want to restrict the information, right? Because if the whole premise is that we're limited on the information we have, we can't have unlimited information, or that sort of messes things up. So yes, the internet has changed the scope for sure, and it's something you need to keep in mind. All
Just
right,
a
so
one,
those
one
are
thing as
some
well.
tips for
If
you.
you like that
Oh yeah,
kind of
go
thing
ahead, Garrett.
too, just a little shout out for everybody. Even if you don't play games a whole lot, there's a series of tabletop games, technically card games. You scan the cards with a phone and it gives you the narrative, called Chronicles of Crime, and they have a whole series across different eras, and one of them is the 1700s. And you could play with that a bit as well, and just try to solve those mysteries yourself and see what comes out. It's a lot of fun.
That does sound like a lot of fun. I love tabletop games. I didn't know that one. I'm gonna check it out. Um, so Fantasy Club. Tonight in the Fantasy Club, I'm going to be discussing symbolism. Now, symbolism is something that can be done really well. It's also something that can be extremely heavy-handed and annoying. And it is really something that affects a lot of different genres. So even if you don't write fantasy, it works well. Actually, in the future, we are going to be combining our fantasy club into a fantasy slash sci-fi club, because we have a lot of sci-fi authors and there is an overlap. So starting next week, we're going to start blending those two together. So, hey, you can always come if you're a sci-fi writer and learn about symbolism as well. Now, tomorrow we have a horror club, don't we, Gareth? What are we doing in horror?
We do. We're back with critiques in horror. So
Ooh.
it's critique club night. And we got a lot of submissions already. Hopefully, we'll get through as many as we can. But yeah, we're reading the opening scenes of novels and short stories and offering straight feedback.
That's awesome. And upcoming this Thursday, we have a deep point of view workshop. So, deep point of view is when you are writing in a way that really immerses the audience in the viewpoint of the character that you know you're looking from. The sometimes it's the narrator, sometimes it's the protagonist, not always, but it's a way to write in a way that really gets the audience down to their level. And we're going to do a lot of different exercises together and go back and forth, because this is one of those writing a deep point of view is a lot about doing the thing, right? There's the concept about making sure you're specific in your language and biased in your language and things like that, and that's fair enough. But we're going to do a lot of actual in-person exercises. So there are 2 sessions. They're going to be on Thursday and Sunday this week. I was trying to pull up the link here for you so I could show you or throw it in the chat. Do you
I've
have it
dropped it
here?
in the chat. I've dropped it in the
Yes,
chat.
go ahead and drop it in the chat there, Gareth. Awesome. And there it is. So yes, please join us for that. And at the end of the workshop, you'll have an opportunity to submit a writing sample and get some feedback, particularly about point of view, but really anything it will go when it comes to the feedback for that as well. And like always, we do have our accountability clubs Mondays at 11 a.m. Eastern. So join us for that. It's a fun little session where I do some warm-up exercises, then we do an in-person writing sprint. Always a lot of fun working with everybody for that. So thank you everybody for joining us. If you're interested in mystery, well, this is your month, because starting next week, we are going to be kicking off a mystery writing challenge. So stay tuned for that. That'll be next week at 1 p.m. It will be a free challenge open to everybody. excuse me, not just our AutoCrypt Pro users, but all of you out there. So like and subscribe, hit the bell, all those things, and you'll hear all about it. This one is going to be a bit of a smaller challenge. It's going to be a quick one. It's only going to last about a week. So, this is not as dramatic as some of the ones we've done in the past. But it's going to be a whole lot of fun, and it's going to be very different because we really haven't done much about mystery, to be honest. We've been asked about it a lot of times. We've done a few live streams, but we're really getting into the mystery genre. It's a really fun genre to work in, and we know a lot of our writers work in the mystery genre as well. Love challenges. Yay! What challenge? Mystery writing challenge. It'll be coming next week. So, was this recorded? Yes, our live streams are always recorded. You can always go back. And if you want to go back, we have years of archives, all kinds of topics. Great channel to check out for all kinds of writing information. So really recommend doing that.
So like and subscribe if you haven't already.
Wrap this up.
Just the YouTube thing there. Like and subscribe. If you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you do, because we're here every week. And yeah, like Daniel said, there's literally years of content there. Between some people don't really know that there's a difference now on YouTube between the videos tab and the live tab. It splits between recordings of stuff that was previously live and videos that have been uploaded. So make sure to check both of those as well when you're going through the channel, because we've done a whole lot of live stuff.
Yep, absolutely. Check it out. Yes, Daniel, you get to see a lot of me in costumes if you go through those videos. It's good times. All right. I will see you all around. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.